Can I go like this? Instead of saying next slide, should I do like this? Do what?
Hello, everyone. Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you. Hi, I am Arohi Tyagi, Associate Dean here at AAFT Online. And I, on behalf of the entire AAFT Online family, welcome you all to this special session with all of you. And whom do we have? We have Miss Shweta Kaw with us, who is the founder of Studio Miraki, an architect with 15 plus years of experience in the industry, including a successful role as a sustainable design consultant in Singapore after completing her post graduation from the prestigious National University of Singapore as a gold medalist. The studio's practice is diverse and ranges from architecture, green buildings, interior, and furniture design. As the name suggests, the intention of the studio is to aim to build a happy and healthy space for man to dwell in its habitat and nurture for him an improved sense of well being by paying attention to the psychological and physiological comfort. So, without further ado, let me welcome Shweta ma'am here. Hi, ma'am, how are you doing?
Hi, Arohi. Thanks for the lovely introduction. A very warm welcome to you as well.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
And to all the learners, in case you have any questions related to the talk that ma'am is delivering, you can put them in the Q&A box, which is located right below on your screens, and I'll be taking them up at the end. All yours, ma'am.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, AAFT, Arohi, everybody out there, for calling me for this webinar, which is extremely interesting and on a topic that is very, very close to my heart, and I'm sure yours as well. As we go through the next, say, 30 to 40 minutes of an experiential and invigorating journey, I'm sure we all of us have takeaways and insights and learning, all of us that have gathered here. Thank you so much, and let's hop on to the journey. You can share my screen.
Yeah, just a second.
Yeah. I cannot see the screen. Yep, now it's coming. Okay, thank you so much, Arohi. So let's start the webinar. Now, the topic for today's webinar is cognitive architecture, designing spaces for human well-being. Next slide, please. So, why is this topic important? Why are we discussing this? Why is it pertinent to talk about this? What are we going to learn today? We're going to explore the intersection of design and human psychology, how human perception shapes design thinking, the various principles from neuroscience and neuropsychiatry that shapes our emotions and hence our built environments. Examples from architecture, including some real-world examples from my projects, as well as some research happening in my studio. And then some real-life applications, which includes 2 international case studies. Next slide. Before starting my presentation, I would like the audience to take a look at the backbone of the research of cognitive architecture, which traces its history to this book, Cognitive Architecture, Designing for How We Respond to the Built Environment, which has been the winner of the Environmental Design Research Association Award as well. In this book, the authors review the new and the latest findings in psychology and neuroscience to help all architects, designers, and planners, basically all of us here, to understand human behavior and hence our response to the built environment. Next slide. So, have you ever wondered while some spaces feel extremely welcoming while the others don't? Next slide. Well, there's a small visual test for the audience here as a warm-up session initially. I'm going to show you two buildings in the upcoming slides, and I would like all of you to make a mental note as to which one of these do you find as more, say, welcoming or attractive or maybe more pleasing. Next slide. So as you absorb this and take a note of your preference in your minds, I would like to tell you the reason for your preference. Well, this question will be answered slowly and initially, say in another 10, 15 slides. And basically, you'll have all your answers at the end of the webinar. Next slide. Because design isn't just about aesthetics, it shapes how we think, feel, and behave. Next slide. Before I start my presentation, I would like to quote Steve Jobs, who's actually the founder of the biggest tech company in the world, that is Apple. But at heart, he was a designer. The broader one's understanding of the human experience, the better design we all shall have. Next slide. So, what is cognitive architecture? Well, by definition, designing spaces informed by how we humans perceive and interact with our surroundings. And we need to emphasize the role of neuroscience and psychology in shaping healthier and more engaging environments. We all of us, architects, interior designers, planners, we all try to follow some certain design principles to elevate our human experiences in the built environments. But all these principles need to be rooted in how our brain is wired, and that forms its crux in neuroscience and neuropsychiatry. Next slide. So, what are the criteria for designing healthy spaces? Of course, you need abundant daylighting, fresh air and ventilation, thermal and acoustic comfort, indoor air quality, especially in today's time, and of course, last but not the least, aesthetic pleasure. But is that enough? Let's find out in our next slide. The biggest challenge that all of us designers have that people should not become cognitively disengaged, and we constantly need to produce some kind of novelty and change because buildings should not be just about spectacle. They need to impact our senses and our disposition as basic sensibilities as mammals. And that is why cognitive sciences and the psychological impact of built environment is extremely pertinent for healthy design. How are our brains wired to perceive spaces? Next. So after a lot of this discussion on cognitive design, I'm going to lay for you some very basic 5 principles that have compressed from my research in the next slide. To my audience out there, there's a very complicated jargon of words that are going to come towards you, but I request all of you to be patient because in the upcoming slides, I would be explaining each of them with the help of illustrations and visual imagery, and I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. So, the research in cognitive sciences shows that the morphology of our human brain has roots in certain particular orientation principles and patterns that influence our psychology. First is the phenomena of thigmotaxis, that is the attraction to edges of spaces and not the center. The second is the human affinity to bilateral symmetry and curves. Third is pareidolia, which I know is the most complex word that you might have heard today. It means that the mind makes illusions from random data. The fourth, obviously, very broadly discussed, is golden ratio. And last but not the least, how nature shapes our minds and provides us psychological comfort and natural shapes, motives, processes, and patterns forms the basis of the cutting-edge research and the projects that have been done worldwide, termed as, say, biophilic design, or you say biomimetic architecture or biomorphic design. Next slide, please. Coming to thermotaxis, it is a wall-hugging trait, as we say. Large open spaces, if you go to any kind of urban squares or say any restaurants or spaces, you will see that large spaces are usually avoided by people in the favor of edges that can offer a lesser vulnerable position. This behavior is called as thigmotaxis. Can you please go to the next slide? I would like to elucidate what I was saying in the form of these images, because we always, as humans, feel more safe and comfortable at the corners than at the center. Next slide, please. As I was giving the example of a restaurant. Now, how does this knowledge help us as designers? Of course, it helps us in spatial planning and designing urban spaces. Next slide. Bilateral symmetry and curves. Symmetry creates a sense of rational order and calm logic. And that is why it was a favored aesthetic of the ancient Greek and Roman architecture. Next slide. As you can see, too much of asymmetry can actually result in a space that feels extremely unbalanced and potentially uncomfortable. And that is a distressor for our mind. Next slide. Coming to talk about curves, there is again some visual imagery that I've shown on the screen. So I would like to ask the audience, don't you think that these are preferred? Say watches with circular faces instead of rectangular ones, or say letters rendered in a curly font, or say couches with smooth cushions. I'm sure all of you, by default, will be liking the more curvaceous dental floss instead of the boxed one. Why is this? Because the type of contour a visual object possesses has an extreme critical influence on my attitude towards that object. How does this knowledge help us in our built environment? Curves have a tremendous psychological impact. They can reduce stress, promote relaxation, easing our brain's threat response. Next slide. Talking about the golden ratio, I'm sure this is pretty popular. The golden ratio is a magical number of 1:1.618 that is found in nature in terms of the Fibonacci series, which you guys could research later on. On the screen, you see some examples, some very, very popular examples of architectural marvels using golden ratio as a proportioning system. You see the Taj Mahal, the Parthenon in Greece, Villa Savoy by Corbusier, Piet Mondrian's very famous painting. And of course, ancient mosques and their courtyards were also proportioned according to the golden ratio. Why is this information important to us? Because golden ratio symbolizes beauty, balance, and symmetry, which we all need to learn as designers. Next slide. So why do you feel that this building is repulsive? Because all of whatever we've talked about, this building is lacking in it. The building lacks in symmetry, scale, and detail, and a lack of variety of scales that our mind reads information is needed to keep us alive. Next slide. Well, the fourth one, which is looks like a very complicated word, but it's not, called pareidolia. So what do you guys see on the screen? Well, I can see, say, a hand in the sky, or maybe a human image on a Coke can, or say a smiling face in a speedometer. Some of you would also see a shark face in an aircraft. What does this mean? Next slide. This means that faces engage us emotionally. You know, at Amazon, they know exactly which book cover works and which one does not, because they know that the number one thing that people click on is the human face, while the second one is a pet. Next slide. Face-like objects engage us emotionally, and we are automatically drawn towards it. So I'm going to show you some more buildings, and you will automatically understand what I'm saying. Next slide. You would automatically feel drawn to these houses. I would also be showing you an example of this in a particular project of mine later on. So yes, as I said, last but not the least, is how we can explore the natural world in our indoor environments. Why healthier architecture must strive to copy nature's organizational patterns. What you see on the screen is, say, some furniture that's derived from, say, a leaf or sand dunes, or maybe some visual imagery of butterflies and birds. I also see a floor lamp that is derived from a flower and a lamp that is derived from pebble stones. I think I would like you all to ask this question to yourselves, that do you feel psychological relief on seeing objects that are derived from natural forms? Again, there's a very beautiful flower which inspires a sofa set. Next slide. Also, there is furniture called as biomorphic furniture, which kind of tries to translate the natural curvilinear forms. Next slide. Well, this is a project done in Japan by Kengo Kuma, which is a children's play school. And as you see, he deploys yellow sunflower-shaped installations in the ceiling. Next slide. And of course, it introduces an element of playfulness as well as happiness amongst the children. Next. This is a project which is also a play school that is done in Philadelphia, USA, very recently. And as you see, what do you see? Aren't you reminded of the Japanese Zen garden and the rocks when you see the seating? Yes, these shapes are always surrounded. We are always surrounded by these shapes, and how we choose to design these shapes affects our built environments, the people who are staying in them. Next slide, please. This example is again of a forest canopy being done in a restaurant. Next slide. So we've spoken a lot about cognitive sciences, how our brain is wired, and we also discussed some foundations of cognitive design. So what happens when science meets design? There is a latest cutting-edge research on how spaces affect our mental health and productivity. The studies on biophilic design that show how natural light and greenery reduce stress and improves our focus. And of course, there are behavioral studies on space usage and wayfinding in hospitals. Next slide, please. So now, how do we apply these principles in real life? I'm going to go through some of my projects and my research work in which we try and apply some of these principles. This is a project that was commissioned to us, which is a villa project in GP Greens, Greater Noida in 2019. Well, our clients wanted to basically use this villa for leisure, rejuvenation, and relaxation. What you see here is an amalgamation of greenery, moss walls, stone textures. Next slide, please. Wooden textures and a circular canopy, a green canopy. Next slide, please. When you enter the terrace, you are fully immersed in nature. Next slide. This is an example of a lounge in the same villa where we try to emulate certain patterns found in nature in the wallpaper and so the artwork that forms a background to this lounge. You would be also seeing a leaf-shaped table in the center, as well as the seating is inspired by a honeycomb pattern that we often find in nature as well. Next. This is a typical view of the dining area in which we're trying to enhance the dining experience by giving a green wall as well as using foliage, which is compressed inside the dining table. Next slide, please. Some views of the dining again. Next slide. Well, this is a 40-room hotel that was one of our earlier commissions. And the sole reason for showing this project is to showcase how natural light is extremely important and how it elevates our mood and improves our experience inside spaces. Next slide, please. This project is 100% daylit, and there is absolutely no use of artificial lighting anywhere throughout the day in this project. And as you can see, we've again used natural wooden and stone textures. Next slide. This is the reception area, fully inundated with natural light. And of course, there is a very interesting play of light and shadow, which also provides variety. Next slide. This is again a very simple hotel room, but the heroes of the design, or I say the stars of the design, are only natural light and views of the green along with the wooden textures. Next slide. This again is the the restaurant area. I would like to also mention that along with bringing in the natural daylight, we take care of the heat gain as well as to how we do the massing in the cantilevers of this building. Next slide, please. Yes, this is again the view of the courtyard and the greens overlooking the hotel. Next slide, please. Now, this is an installation which has been very recently completed by us at the Expo Mall in Noida. We were commissioned to design a hotel room mock-up for our clients. And we chose to go outside of the very stereotypical, mundane and sterile hotel rooms that we kind of see all the time, in which the guests don't feel any connection to the natural world inside those boxes. The theme has been coined by us for this installation as desert tranquility. As you will see, there's a sunset-shaped wallpaper, and along with very terracotta, burnt orange, and wooden texture tones, we strive at having very warm and tranquil atmosphere in this setup. Also, you can see how curvilinear free-flowing lines have been used to design all the products, be it the bed or the rugs. Of course, not to miss the flower-shaped lamp as well. Nature transpires and inspires everything in this extraordinary setting. Next slide. Well, this is a one-bedroom in a penthouse done by us 2 years back. And again, in this, we try to create a forest-like setting as this bedroom was done for the elderly people in the house who don't go out due to a lot of physical ailments. We try to create an atmosphere for them in which they would feel as if they're always connected to the forest and the trees and the natural world. There is a very inspiring, previous slide. There's a very inspiring forest-shaped wallpaper along with the mountain bag. And you can see some elements thrown in like side tables that are inspired from tree trunks as well as softness in the carpets. Next slide, please. Well, this is also an image from the same project, but we just try to do some flower-shaped chandeliers in this one because the space needed to be a bit more luxurious. Next slide, please. Oh, this is a very amazing one-room transformation done by a studio. I would like to go to the next slide so that you can see the transformation. This very dull, dark, and insipid room, next slide, please, was converted into this very vibrant, gleaming with light kind of a room. Again, as you see, we're trying to bring in a gradient of blue, which means we're trying to bring in a canvas of sky inside, along with, as the teenage girl says, a dreamy, starry night. Next slide, please. Again, to show the transformation of how an artificial sky can change a space inside. This also, again, is a one-room transformation done by us for a little kid. And as I was speaking about the usage of curves in one of the initial slides, being a kid, we wanted to avoid any sharp edges in the room so that he would not get hurt. Next slide, please. So the design of the bed, the low height bed, along with the low height curvilinear side tables, of course, is very is very playful for the child as well. Next slide, please. Also, at times, in certain projects, the product design is the hero of the ship. And that is why a very specifically designed car installation and this assembly of the side table is particularly engaging for the kid who uses this to study. And of course, his interest in using the entire assembly and for his activities goes up. Next slide, please. This is an upcoming project in our studio that we are still exploring. It is a hospital interiors in Greater Noida. And I believe that there is maximum psychological distress in a hospital setting. So our initial concept started with using marine life as an inspiration. Next slide, please. So as we see that we are trying to mimic marine life and natural ocean flows, and these are some options that have been made. And I think a very particular striking feature is the reception desk, which I would like to talk about later. Next slide, please. This is the waiting area that we are designing. Again, you see a marine life shaped wallpaper. Next slide. And we're trying to explore the flowing pattern in terms of how fishes interact in the oceans and something that can give a sense of momentum in the space. Next slide. This is a typical product design exercise that we are doing again. Next slide, please, in which we're trying to mimic the coral reefs found in the oceans as the main reception table for the hospital. Now, this is the last slide for my projects. And in case you guys remember, I was talking about peridolia in the beginning. This is a vaccination room for pediatric cancer patients in Hauskas. And of course, if you can spot what I'm saying, there are illusions of human faces in this and what we're trying to achieve. Next slide. Now let's talk about two global case studies. Next slide, please. Now this building is Kampung Admiralty Singapore by Boha Architects. That was the winner of the Best Building of the Year award in the World Architectural Festival a few years back. As you can see, this is a mixed-use development, which is intertwined in greenery. Next slide, please. And if you see the plan of this building, you can easily spot the courtyards as well as the terrace gardens, as well as the play areas at different levels that are harmoniously blended with the living areas. Next slide, please. As you see a section, all the retail and the food and the beverages on the basement, the ground floor, and all the living quarters are amalgamated with all the sky gardens and terraces. Next slide. Well, yes, it looks like a forest, but you are actually on, say, the 7th or the 8th floor of a building. How would you feel in this space? Next slide. Next slide. There's a typical play area. Again, this is not the ground floor, but the upper levels. Next slide. There are also apartments for the elderly and the aging population in this building, and as you can see, the kind of spaces that have been created at the upper floors for the elderly people, in which you can have direct views to all the terraced gardens. Also, there's a lot of biodiversity in these trees that I've seen in some research papers that is attracting a lot of butterflies and insects. And there is this mini forest that's being created inside this residential development. Next slide, please. Well, this is one of the famous buildings. I'm sure a lot of you already know about it because it is still in construction. It is the Sagrada Familia in Spain by the master architect Antonio Gaudi. This building is a masterclass in architecture itself. And as you can see, it is very famous for its ornate exterior. Next slide, please. But I would like to draw attention to the interiors of this building. Next slide, please. Yes, I would like to draw more attention to the interiors of this building because Gaudi always believed that there is no straight line in nature, and hence he never used any straight lines. As you see, all the columns have been inspired from tree trunks And he wanted to give the illusion of being under palm trees or the canopies of forests. Next slide, please. This is the imagery he's trying to create with the natural world and its elements inside. Next slide. And these are, of course, stained glass windows that bring in all the color and the light, also inspired by nature. Next slide, please. There is a lot of ornamental details also inspired from the natural world. Next slide. Yes, next slide. Next slide. So, what is the future of cognitive architecture? Well, advances in virtual reality and artificial intelligence is the way to go for all of us here, right? So, a lot of immersive tools like Enscape and Twinmotion allow architects to evaluate spatial comfort, lighting, a lot of elements pre construction, and we can identify a lot of stress points beforehand. And a lot of tools like the Autodesk generative design can create optimized data informed iterations, which can predict the design's impact on well being and productivity. And of course, there is integration of sustainability with cognitive design now. So, what are the key lessons from today? Next slide. Design is a balance of form, function, and human psychology, and applying cognitive principles creates healthier and more engaging spaces. And the most important, observation and empathy are vital for future designers, that is, you. Next slide. So, what kind of a designer do you strive to be? The spaces that you design will shape how people live, work, and feel. So, let's make them count. I would like to end the webinar by my favorite quotation from Aristotle. The aim of art is to represent not the outward appearance of things, but their inward significance. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for taking time out for this webinar, and thanks to AAFT for calling me here. And all the best to everybody.
Well, thank you so much, ma'am, for such a wonderful session which we had. And I'm sure all the learners must have gained a lot of insight into, the cognitive thing, and the examples by which you showed everything was really amazing, and your work was truly commendable.
Thanks, Arohi.
Yeah, and to all our learners, before we move ahead to the Q&A section, I would just want to tell you all that in case you have any questions, you have any doubts, you can just put them in the Q&A box and I'll be taking them up right now. And before I do that, I also want to tell you that we at AAFT Online have a diploma course in interior design, wherein you can learn about all these designs and you can learn about the various color combinations and how you can use all of those to create your own personal design and space, and create your own different things, and you can master these with this diploma program. In case you want to know more about it, you can call at this number or you can drop in an email and we'll be happy to get in touch with you. We have a new batch which starts on 15th of February. So in case you're interested, please connect with us quickly so that you can start beginning to learn as soon as possible. All right, ma'am. So we have few questions over here. And the first one is by Mannat, and she's saying that do we have to take a particular course for cognitive architecture, or we just have to take up, B architecture? What's the process like?
Well, of course, you need to take up bachelor's in architecture because that is it would do the hand holding for you to be able to understand what I'm talking about. Because without a basic degree in the building sciences, all this information would actually kind of you would not be able to relate to it. So I would say take up the basic course and then add on to it by doing research in a lot of other fields. And of course, cognitive architecture is just one of them.
Great, ma'am. And also, ma'am, because you showed so many different projects which you've done, can you tell us how or what important psychological aspects you keep in mind as a designer when you create a living space versus a workspace?
Well, in COVID-19, I think the boundaries between living in the workspaces were definitely very blurred, but the world has, adopted a new normal. And I think a lot of people kind of found it very difficult to work from their houses because their houses were not designed in a way where they could work there as well. So I think what is very important in houses, I would say, is that there needs to be this quality of coziness, of warmth, of being able to have conversations with people. I don't find extremely jarring and very bold kind of statements in residential spaces to be, the ones that should be very sought after, because I think the world is increasingly moving towards social media for taking inspirations for, but that is something which is a very commercialized aspect of it. We need to think more about how natively as humans we used to live and how we need to live and foster connections. And of course, in terms of workplace, I think in workspaces also now the configurations of a very typical desks and like, earlier you used to have these sea of desks and that's about it in an office. But there was an extreme hierarchy that was created between different departments. I think we're just trying to blur those boundaries as well. We try to make it more cooperative. Everybody, kind of has lunch together. We kind of try to make it a cohesive environment in the workspace also. And also, since you're spending say 8 to 10 hours in your workplace, you need to make it more fun, more colorful, more interesting, and so that you really actually wants to get up each day and wants to come to work. So that needs to be kept in mind.
Thank you so much for answering that, ma'am. We have another question by Shravan, and the question is that how about the green eco park in workplace, like in airport, the Singapore airport? Is it also possible for India?
Well, I have stayed in Singapore for 2 years and done my master's there as well. So being gone through a lot that airport. Of course, everything is possible, but I think we still are a bit, away from the kind of infrastructure that Singapore has, the kind of construction they have. But of course, everything is possible. It all depends on policy planners and how much weightage do we, give to the green spaces and the open spaces, and not only the infrastructure and the built environment. Of course, it's possible.
All right, great. Thank you, ma'am, for again answering that. There is another question, and the question is that in case we want to follow any architects for cognitive architecture, whom would you recommend?
Well, please read the book first. I would say step one, do some research, read some books, and then only because I think I feel that we should not really influence people's minds. Everybody has their own path to take. So I would say that just because it's say a buzzword, like a few years back, like even now, sustainability was buzzword. Now cognitive architecture is a buzzword. I think you should just do your own research. And I would say that if you ask me one architect, I would say you should. I look a lot at Woha architects in Singapore, and I really follow their projects. Maybe you can have a look at their work.
Sure, ma'am. That was really nice. Also, we have questions because you said that first read the book, etc. So, if you could recommend some literature, some resources, or some books to learn more about cognitive architecture.
Uh, there's a book in my presentation that I've already mentioned in the beginning. I think we should start with that. And of course, there is other research in Scopus, and I mean, I cannot just offhand remember, but I can share some links with you, and you can share it with the webinar participants later on.
Sure, ma'am, we'll do that. Also, ma'am, how important is giving a psychological comfort in design, reducing stress these days? Do you think it also has an impact of the stress level that we encounter in our work these days, and by creating
Of
maybe,
course.
yeah, like the designs which are compliant towards them that can reduce stress or help in a reduction of anxiety.
Of course, it is. In fact, it is the most important thing to be considered. And you will find a lot of, like for all the people who are attending this webinar, there is a lot of research available. Like, for example, there are these simulation softwares now in which you can do studies as to how you expose, uh, say, different people to different kind of environments. Say one is with some plants, one is without plants, one is, you kind of create different scenarios and you actually can measure their blood pressure, their stress levels. There are a lot of studies that are being done. In fact, there was a very recent study that I did about how building facades impact your mind. Basically, the cities in which you live, building facades are also a part of your, visual imagery every day. So there is this extensive study on how that also adds to your stress. So once we are able to, you have numerical values for all these things. Probably, just like doctors give you a blood test, and then you come to know of, what are the anomalies. The same way, research is available online as to the question that you're asking me. It is all quantified now and available for you to, assess and see, and how all of it is deteriorating our health. We all have numbers that can actually prove all that now.
Wow, that's pretty interesting, actually. Okay. Ashiti is asking a question that how can we differentiate the space particularly focused for meditation from other spaces?
Well, meditation spaces require a very different kind of calm, because I do meditation myself. So I think the prerequisites for a meditation space are that you need to go inward rather than, focusing on what's there outside in the room. So that is a particular strategy of how you you need to not draw your focus and all the elements of design so that you focus more inwards. I would employ that strategy along with, of course, I think color and texture plays and light. You could look at a lot of meditation spaces done by the architect Tadao on Ando. He has used color and light in a very immersive manner. So you can look at Tadao Ando's work, see how meditation halls are designed, and also there is one particular thing which you can also read about is uh, how the approach. One is when you're inside the meditation hall, and one is how you plan your approach and entry into the meditation hall. A lot of people use a lot of, there's again a lot of research on how you do that because your mind needs to prepare for a meditative journey. So it is not just that you open the door and get into this place. It is a transition from the outside world into the inside world and how that transition needs to be designed. There is a lot of research on that as well.
Great. That's very insightful, ma'am. Also, ma'am, any particular design features you would want to highlight to help people with disabilities so that they can feel more comfortable in a particular space?
I think people with disabilities, especially challenged, I would say, the bylaws these days, of course, they cater a lot to, suppose you need to have ramps, you need to have railings, you need to have you know all the equipment that's necessary for them to be able to feel fully functional everywhere. Apart from following all that, I think what is very important is to alleviate them from all the distress that is already going on in their lives. So say suppose I need to go to a mall. If I am specially challenged, it is extremely tough for me because I am constantly thinking about wayfinding, parking, so bylaws give you a lot of things like, say, they will say that, okay, designate one car parking for so many car parks. But then is it actually working in the layout? Is the person actually feeling comfortable? The way everything is being laid out for him, that is extremely important. And I think in certain cases, in certain kinds of disabilities, uh, textures play a very important role because, say, a person cannot see, so That is also a kind of disability. So some people can feel textures more because they can't see. Some people have some loss of hearing. So it is not just about the visual senses, but also about touch, smell, all those, which also needs to be enhanced when people with disabilities are using the space, because we specialize too much on the visual aspect, right? And we kind of ignore that we have five senses, right? So touch, texture, all that.
Yeah, I think very wonderfully explained again, ma'am. Also, ma'am, how difficult it is to manage both, say, the aesthetic sense or the emotional thing, along with the practicality of the design which you are creating. Do you feel that there are certain challenges which come? And if yes, then how do you overcome those challenges?
Well, of course, the entire profession is a big challenge in itself. Clients are a big challenge. Everything is a challenge is thrown at you every day. But I would not say that, the way we're trying to put it is that this is something which is an add-on, but that's not really the thing, I mean, spaces need to be designed keeping this in mind, and there is really no other way. And also, I don't think that in terms of practicality, I don't see that there is anything impractical. But of course, I do feel that in certain projects we do have budgetary constraints, and cost has an implication. So we kind of tend to tone down things, and maybe we can do some things, we cannot do some things. But some of the projects that I've actually shown are not actually extremely big budget projects. For example, the hotel that I showed, you really don't see any extreme. Normally, hotels have a very flamboyance, but that hotel is extremely simple, just by using an element of natural light and greenery, which is, of course, you need more expertise in. You need to have that sensitivity in designing and planning as to how the layouts are done, how the people are feeling in different kind of spaces, how the proportioning of spaces is done. It is not about just placing spaces. There is something called as the lens to width, or a ratio, or a proportion. There is volume. So all these things are extremely important, and there's the very simple keys to it. I really don't think that there is something to do with practicality. Of course, clients and cost will always be a constraint in every project, no matter what.
All right, ma'am. And also, ma'am, what are the future trends which you see, in cognitive architecture these days?
I think biomimetic architecture and biophilic design are the way to go. We don't use a lot here in India currently. But if you see projects abroad, especially, every year there is this World Architecture Festival that is held. And all the projects that are, shortlisted or maybe say awarded, you will ultimately see that there isn't a sense of nature in all these projects. Everybody is trying to go for net zero buildings, sustainable buildings, and eco-friendly materials. So that is something that is here to stay. And, that will always be here.
Right, ma'am. And ma'am, as you know that, many people here are budding, interior designers or people who want to make their career in the design field. So what would be your, advice to them? How should their learning approach be so that they can become a holistic designer?
Well, I think that there are really no shortcuts in this profession. That is the first thing that I would like to tell all the budding architects and interior designers. Um, you need to be extremely passionate about the subjects, and that is the only way you can, get anywhere. And I would say that uh, a lot of people have an innate creativity, which can overflow in any dimension, be it interiors, be it product, be it space planning, be it architecture, be it designing footwear, or anything for that matter. So I would say that tap into your inner source or the creative energy. That is the only way to really go about it in this field, because constraints are enormous. But if you keep on thinking about the constraints, you will not be able to really reach anywhere. So I think passion, hard work, and patience are the three most important things, because at times you would land projects which will take, say, years and years to get built. It can take 5 years, 8 years, 10 years. So um, the impatience to see your project seeing the day of the light is something that everybody needs to work on. And you need to be extremely patient, apart from being a creative person, to be in this profession. That is the reality.
Right, ma'am. And when you were talking about challenges, one thing which came to my mind was that you are a female entrepreneur. And did you face any challenges when it came to gender biased roles or anything like that in this segment?
I'm often asked this question, and I will answer without any diplomacy. Yes, it is. Construction is predominantly male dominated, but what I've seen now, there's a changing trend that interior design has a preference for females. I don't know why actually, but a lot of clients go in for females if they want to get some interior design or some decor done. And there is this clear, there is this line that's being drawn as to hardcore construction goes to the males and interiors and decor goes to the females. So I really don't know why that bias is there, because it has nothing to do with gender. Design thinking, it has nothing to do with gender. But yes, in a day-to-day scenario, I would definitely say that you do come across a gender bias, both males and females, as I said. The separation is happening. But then, yeah, I guess you take everything in your stride and just kind of go about it, because a lot of times it's not expected. I would say it's assumed that females cannot, say, coordinate with contractors, um, cannot get work done at sites, they cannot do PMC. All this is extremely untrue.
Right, ma'am. And also, ma'am, one last question before we end the
Yeah.
session. That from where do you drive your, creative zeal? I mean, what do you look up to? You might be having those days when you are not wanting to do anything or feeling low, or from where do you draw your inspiration, if I may put it that way?
All of us has good and bad days. No day is perfect, no time is perfect, but you got to give your best. You got to carry on. You got to do your work. Um, you got to do what makes you happy. You know, if if designing or creating something new makes you happy, that in how do you say that serotonin rush that you get by drawing on that piece of paper, that is what makes me go every day. That is the only thing.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for answering that. But there are two more questions. I would take the liberty to
Okay,
ask those as
sure,
well.
please.
So Anusha is asking a question that interior of a project is important, but the exterior is also important. So what can be taken into consideration so that the transition from exterior to interior is smooth?
Well, for me, I would say that it's all very connected and interrelated. I don't see exterior and interior as very separate, because the exterior impacts the interior and vice versa. So, for example, when you talk about exterior, it is not just about, say, how we design the facade. The materials in the exterior influence your interior. Um, is your building well insulated? Is your building moisture resistant? Is it acoustically working? Because all that impacts parameters in the interiors, that is noise, temperature, water seepage, right? So it is just very interrelated. I really don't think that we can separately deal with these as a as a designer or as a construction agency. I understand that these days it just drifted apart and become very separate. As to, I do get queries as to please do the facade and interior is done by somebody else. I don't understand this distinction, because it's one space, one building, one fabric.
Right, ma'am. And the last question which we have is from Mannat, and the question is that what's your opinion about architectural internships? How important they are, and is it enough to gain experience or exposure, or so that we can get a practical knowledge of things, how they work?
Well, Mannat, I would say that, of course, architectural internships are important, but what is more important is gaining experience before you want to, say, start your own firm, go for masters. I recommend that everybody needs to get very brutally trained in an office for at least 3 to 5 years, because a lot of I know that a lot of youngsters, there's this immediate thing of how do you say, you kind of graduate, you do your internship, and some uncle will always have a residence to do, get it done by you, right? And they start their own practices. Architectural internship is extremely important for you to be able to know as to what you really want to do in life. When I when I was in college, I thought that I wanted to do interiors. When I finished architecture, I wanted to do something else. When I did my internship, I became clearer as to what I really want to do. And that's what I did my master's in. And of course, after say 3 to 5 years of working, I was absolutely sure of what I want to do for the rest of my life. So the internship gives you an insight into the outside world, because the college world is very protective, and it's not very practical, because in college you can do as much exploration as you want. There are no budgetary constraints, there are no clients, everything is theoretical. So when you do an internship, you understand how the real world works. And that is, that's what kind of puts you at the edge.
Absolutely agree with you, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing such a wonderful session, and so many
Thank you.
insights which we got through the practical projects which you showed us. And before I end, I would also want to tell the learners that in case you want to learn more about space design, the color combinations, aesthetics, and the psychological effect, which all these things have, you can think of enrolling in our online diploma program in interior design. And mind you, our new batch is starting on the 15th of February. And in case you have any queries regarding the syllabi, regarding anything else, we are here to help you. You can call us at this number, or you can drop in an email, and we'll be happy to get in touch with you. So thank you once again, Shweta ma'am, for such a wonderful session.
Thank you so much, AAFT. Thank you so much, Arohi. And thank you to all of you who have been extremely patient to sit till 5 p.m. and listen to me. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure was all ours, ma'am. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. Have a good day.
Have a good day. Thank you so much.